Hey everyone, this is Nick, and I think it's time we took another look at a desktop environment tier list, because the last one I did was in 2023, and things have moved quite a lot since then. Not only in the Wayland support department, because a lot of those desktops now have at least an experimental session for Wayland, but also in terms of features and the general direction these desktops are going. So as always, it's not your usual tier maker tier list. I'll try to showcase the desktop environments while I'm talking about them. And also, I'm not talking about tiling window managers here because they are not full desktop environments with their app selection, so they don't offer the complete experience that I'm looking for when I'm looking at desktop environments. Now, let's start by talking about our sponsor and then we'll get going. This video is sponsored by Proton VPN. You all know about Proton. They offer you a fully end-to-end and zero-access encrypted suite of services. You have your email account, you have your calendars, your contacts, your online storage, your password manager, but you also have your VPN. You all know what a VPN does. It protects your web browsing from prying eyes. But did you know that your internet service provider could also see everything that you did? When you visit any website, you connect to it through your internet service provider. And some of them tend to grab a little bit of data about you, and they also tend to monetize that information or use it for ad targeting. And Proton VPN protects you from this. They take the role of your internet service provider, and they're the ones routing your data to the correct destination, because the connection between your device and Proton server is encrypted. This means that your internet service provider cannot see your online activity. It also means that the websites that you're visiting cannot see your real IP address. And on top of that, all the code for their applications is publicly available and can be audited by anyone. But Proton VPN also has their NetShield ads and tracker blockers, meaning that they're blocking privacy-invading ads, they're stopping trackers from monitoring your browsing, and they're preventing malware from infecting your device. So if you want your online activity to remain yours without even your ISP knowing about it and monetizing it, then check out Proton VPN by using the link in the description of the video. Okay, so we'll start with a desktop environment I have used for a long while but I don't currently use, and that's GNOME. GNOME is an excellent desktop environment. It offers a complete suite of applications. They're actually plugging the various gaps like a basic audio player, which they didn't really have before, and they have a really strong application ecosystem thanks to their unified development library called libadwaita. A lot of apps have emerged for GNOME. It's actually the most vibrant app ecosystem out there for Linux desktops. Application developers tend to default to building a GNOME app first, and that's kind of important because it means most of the apps you'll be running on your desktop will look coherent and have the same design language. GNOME is also making big progress on adding support for more advanced things that generally just KDE has. Things like HDR support, variable refresh rate, support for VR headsets and gamings, triple buffering, all of that stuff has been coming to GNOME recently, and it makes the desktop a much stronger contender for most use cases. GNOME also works really well on touchscreens and tablets, which is cool. They're also focusing on having adaptive applications and desktops, meaning it can run properly on smaller form factor devices, even though that's not important for a lot of people. And they've also added a bunch more features, stuff that they generally don't tend to add, options in the settings. It's still not KDE, it's still not even Cinnamon or Mate, but they are willing to add more and more options when they feel they are relevant, and that's important because for a while GNOME was the desktop that refused to let you configure anything, and it seems like they've changed their opinion on this exact topic. Where GNOME is a little bit problematic for me is that they still lack a few specific options that most desktop users want. You still don't have a system tray by default. They have their background apps implementation, but it's just not the same. It doesn't have the same feature set. They're planning to add context menus to these background apps, but just having that little icon in your system tray sometimes is what you're really looking for without having to click on a specific menu. You can add that through extensions, but the fact of the matter is extensions tend to break with every new GNOME version. Same goes for a dock. Having to go into the activities view is not a problem if you're a keyboard user, but if you're a mouse user, it's kind of annoying to flick your mouse to the upper left corner and then down to the dock. It's not the most practical way of doing things if you don't just use the super key and type things on your keyboard. All of these gaps are filled with extensions, but like we said, extensions tend to break sometimes and compatibility is not assured. So this is a little problem for me on GNOME, which is why I can't put it at the top tier. I'll put it at good. The next one is Cinnamon. Cinnamon is the default desktop environment for Linux Mint, but it's also available on various other distributions that ship it as an option, a spin, a variant, a flavor, no matter how you want to call that. Cinnamon is basically KDE, but written with GNOME technologies underneath, with GTK. It has a lot more options than GNOME has. It doesn't have as many as KDE, but it does have a lot. And previously, I felt Cinnamon was a really good middle-of-the-road desktop, but I felt it was sort of held back by the fact it really remained focused on X11 and they had not started work on Wayland at all, which was a problem. Because if we're being realistic, X11 is dead. It is unmaintained. No one is contributing any code to it apart from X Wayland. So Wayland is the only way forward, and not having started work on that in 2023 was a problem. Fortunately, Cinnamon has fixed that. They have an experimental Wayland session, they have improved upon it in the latest Cinnamon version, and they didn't stop improving the desktop itself. You have better default themes when you're not on Linux Mint, you have better default apps, you get features, you get more reliability on all their software stack because they're really the only ones investing in Debian package tooling, at least graphically, which is very important because Linux Mint is mostly a Debian-based distro and Cinnamon is mostly made for Linux Mint. It is a very, very strong desktop, and even though the Wayland session isn't fully complete and perfect, I think it really warrants its place in the top tier. Next is XFCE. XFCE is a long-standing desktop and it does tend to appeal more to people who started using Linux maybe back when I started in 2006. It has a very old school interface. It doesn't try to revolutionize the desktop. It doesn't try to cram every single option you could have. It offers a robust set of default applications, even though they are sometimes mixed and matched. Some have menu bars, some don't, some have client-side decorations, some don't. You have some little problems here and there, but generally it is a unified platform that works well. The problem with XFCE is that it's a smaller project. They just do not have as many developers as GNOME, KDE, or maybe even Cinnamon. That being said, they do have most of the basics there. They do have a lot of options to really tweak the thing to your liking, and they also have an experimental Wayland session now, something they really hadn't started at all on back in 2023 in my previous tier list. Now they have that. It is not usable right now, but it is something that they've implemented, meaning this desktop will survive the next 5, 6, 7 years. They are future-proofing themselves, and that's really important. Now, personally, I do feel like all the applets and the way you configure the desktop and the general look is not super appealing. It feels like you're stepping back in time to the Windows XP era, and I don't have much nostalgia for this, but it does tend to use fewer resources, it does tend to perform pretty well on lower end computers, so it does have a place. I'll put it on average because personally it's not something I would see myself using. I find it relatively frustrating, and beauty and aesthetics are important to me when I use a desktop, but XFCE is definitely not a bad choice. Next is LXQt. I call it KDE Lite Edition because it is based on a lot of KDE technologies. It does reuse the KDE frameworks, a lot of the KDE components. It's based on Qt, just like KDE, but it is a more lightweight desktop. They don't offer as much as KDE offers, but they do have a solid foundation. Now, in use, I don't find it particularly pleasing because it does give me the same vibes as XFCE. It does look a bit older. it is a bit more convoluted. You have a lot of older interface paradigms, like little applets everywhere that have right-click menus that don't look the same with each other, and it is not necessarily my cup of tea, but they are not a bad option. In my testing, I found it to use relatively fewer system resources than most other desktops out there, which is interesting if you have a low-power computer or not a lot of RAM. And also, they are future-proofing themselves as well. They do have that experimental Wayland session right now, which even can work with various different window managers if you don't want to use what LXQt offers by default. Now, I do find that this desktop lacks a strong, cohesive vision. It feels like they built a shell and then they just stacked various apps on top of it, which aren't specifically designed by the LXQt team. They use a file manager that is just an alternative that you could use on KDE. They use a Qt terminal. They use various tools here and there that aren't built with the same vision, the same visual design language. You can theme them, but you feel like all the options aren't necessarily in the same place, and I'm not the biggest fan of that. So here again, LXQt will go into average for me. It is not bad, it is lightweight, it has its use cases, but it's just not for me. The next one will be Deepin. And Deepin, not the distro, the desktop environment, is not something I personally enjoy. It does look really good on screenshots, and it is a desktop that does receive a fair amount of development time. They have a really nice visual style with applications looking the part and feeling like a coherent whole. The problem is these applications are still extremely limited. Even if you compare them to their GNOME counterparts, they just don't have the same breadth of options and configurations and features. All of these applications still feel like they're proof of concepts and not real full-featured ones. And if you try to replace them with anything else that doesn't come from Deepin, all of a sudden the visual style completely breaks apart, nothing you add will look at home on Deepin, and so your desktop will turn into a mishmash of disjointed parts that I just do not like using. Also, Deepin as a whole seems to be more focused into building an entire platform as a distro than building a really strong desktop. So while they do add a bunch of features onto the Deepin desktop, they're all really sort of linking back to the Deepin distro with support for their Leany apps, which kind of seem to be a Flatpak fork and serving the same purpose. They're adding all those AI assistants everywhere that you still need to add your own AI provider in for them to work, meaning they're completely useless if you don't already have a subscription to any form of AI provider. It's just not a desktop I enjoy using at all, and honestly, when you look at all the other choices you have, I don't really see a strong proposition, a strong reason to use Deepin over a configured and beautified KDE or GNOME, for example. So for me, it goes at the bottom tier because there is just no way I would use Deepin over anything else that we have. The next one we'll look at is KDE, it's Plasma. It's the one I use as my daily driver. I've been using it for a few years now, and for me it is the top tier desktop right now. The KDE team released Plasma 6 at the beginning of 2024 with a few teething problems, but it wasn't there yet back when I made my previous iteration of this ranking video. Plasma 6 is excellent. It is now really stabilized. I do not encounter any crashes. I really don't have bugs in day-to-day use when I use KDE, and I use it with an NVIDIA GPU, and I do use the latest version as well on a Debian-based distro. It's Tuxedo OS. KDE is the most complete proposition you could get on Linux right now. It can be daunting because when you open the settings, you see that there are a lot of options everywhere. You can configure very basic things like just the color of your windows or the icon theme, all the way up to window rules, which let you completely change how your window manager handles certain windows. It is also a very extensible desktop. You can completely change the layout, completely change the panels, the widgets. You can add a ton of different things on top of it. You even have complete complete scripts that give you a full tiling window manager on top of their default window manager if you want. It is a very, very complete desktop, and all their default apps are also super powerful, although the KDE team did a really good job in hiding some of that complexity away. The default look for these apps is really simple. You really know how to use them instantly, but if you do need more options and you do need to change the layout of these apps, all the power is at your fingertips. Previously, I found KDE way too convoluted, too complex, and it overwhelmed me with options and settings and features, but I think with Plasma 6 and the following releases, they really hit a strong point where it is really simple by default, and it does have all the power underneath, and for me, it makes it the best desktop out there for Linux. So they're kind of the forefront of the Linux desktop these days. I really like what they're doing. I plan to keep using them for a long while. For me, they're top tier. Now let's move on to Cosmic. I know this one isn't released yet, it isn't even in beta at the time I'm recording this, it's still at Alpha 7 I think, but it is shaping up really nicely and we do need to include it. The only reason I delayed this video in 2024 was because I was expecting Cosmic to release around July, but it never really materialized. So here we go, we're gonna talk about Cosmic Alpha, and Cosmic is looking really, really good. Now, it is not as complete as KDE or even GNOME. It doesn't have the same breadth of default applications made specifically for that desktop, but the desktop experience itself shows a really strong vision. They want you to have this specific layout working, but you can tweak it in the important ways. It doesn't give you complete freedom to rejig the entire desktop like KDE does, but it does give you a lot of options to make sure that this layout works for your needs specifically. They also have their default auto tiling feature, which is still absolutely stellar. You can move from floating windows to fully tiled windows with window groups at the press of a button or with a little applet up top. It is fantastic. They're starting to add all the options that people expect, but they're still more on the GNOME level of settings than closer to Cinnamon or KDE. It is also, very importantly, a fully future-proof desktop because it's been built specifically for the modern Linux stack. It's only based on Wayland. They don't have any older X11 legacy code hanging around that they have to carry like the older desktops like GNOME and KDE. They are just building things from scratch specifically for Wayland, meaning they can have a clean slate and make sure to implement things that really performs in the best way. Now, in my testing, it does tend to perform the same as KDE and GNOME, but it is an alpha, so things could improve and it could turn into a more lightweight desktop. It is not finished. I cannot really give it a perfect rating yet, but I can already place it in good, and I could honestly see myself using it as a daily driver in its current form if it was a bit more stable and polished in some places, which it will likely be when the stable version releases, probably before the end of the year. Next is Budgie, and Budgie I can't really give a really high rating to that desktop because they're still kind of stuck in redesign limbo. They still have a competent enough desktop. Budgie in its current iteration isn't bad. It is GNOME based. It uses a lot of GNOME technologies and some GNOME applications, including some of their settings, but it is still a middle of the road kind of tacked on customization onto GNOME, and they want to move away from that. They looked at Enlightenment libraries, but they sort of decided it wasn't working for them because their Wayland support wasn't advanced enough, so they're apparently looking at what Cosmic is proposing, if I remember correctly, but I haven't seen a lot of progress on that. The team hasn't really shared many progress reports on all of that, and that's kind of annoying, because right now, if you use Budgie, you use something that is kind of in maintenance mode. You know that the end product that you might get in 2 or 3 years will not look like that at all. So you're not using the current vision for the Budgie team, you're using the older version. In itself, it works. It is not super coherent. It is, in my opinion, not as polished as something like GNOME or KDE. So for me, I'm gonna put it in no thanks. It's not the worst tier, but it's not something I could see myself using day to day. Next is Mate, and I absolutely love Mate. I started using Linux in 2006 with Ubuntu 6.06. It came with GNOME 2, and GNOME 2 is Mate. Mate is exactly GNOME 2 with a few touches here and there to make it run normally on modern computers. The thing is, desktops and how you use a computer, it has progressed quite a lot since the introduction of GNOME 2. And I myself, as a computer user, have moved on from this older paradigm. I use my keyboard a lot more than I used to back when I used GNOME 2. Mate is not really adapted to that. They don't really have a strong unified launcher that lets you open files or apps or web pages or whatever else. They don't really have a keyboard-centric thing. Their customization options are there, but they're really old and not super intuitive. Everything looks really dated. And I think the main problem isn't that, because some people just don't care about this, they want something that works, and Mate works. The problem is Mate doesn't have enough developers, and they just don't follow the current Linux desktop fast enough. They are really not capable of keeping up with GNOME and KDE. They don't have the HDR stuff, the VRR stuff, the VR stuff at all. They don't have Wayland support currently. They just don't offer a strong proposition, and currently you could just use current GNOME 48 with extensions and replicate this entire layout if you preferred, but with all the niceties of current modern GNOME, which in my opinion is a better proposition than Mate. So Mate is gonna go in the no thanks category. It's not trash, it's not bad, I just don't see myself using it over GNOME, for example. Now we come to Pantheon. Pantheon is the desktop environment used by Elementary OS. It is the distro I used when I started this channel, and I have a lot of nostalgia and love for it. But Pantheon as a desktop environment also does not keep up with the likes of GNOME and KDE. They have a way smaller development team, and they just cannot catch up. Their look and feel is starting to be pretty dated. I used to really enjoy this Tango icon style, sort of cartoonish, with this very simple visual style that keeps a few gradients here and there, sort of Web 2.0, but today it just doesn't look the part when you compare it to modern GNOME, modern KDE, or even something like Cinnamon. You can't really theme it all that well because Pantheon apps use a specific library called Granite on top of GTK, meaning that the theme has to be specifically adapted for Pantheon itself, for Elementary OS itself, and there aren't a lot of themes that do that. So visually, it starts on a lower level for me than GNOME or KDE or even something like XFCE, which is a problem. But then you also have the feature set, and while Elementary OS does offer a very polished, really nice looking experience, it does suffer from the same problem as Deepin. Its apps just lack features. You just don't have enough in every single of these apps, and that's because the developers develop the entire desktop environment, but also the distro, and there just aren't enough developers to do all of that well. The desktop isn't bad, and if you don't have really advanced needs in terms of your applications, the options, and how you want your desktop to work specifically, then Pantheon is not a bad choice at all. So I'll put it in average. It just doesn't fit my needs anymore. I think it's better than Mate, I think it's better than Deepin, but it's just not something I could see myself going back to unless they made significant strides in the feature set department. I'm also going to include Unity here. Unity is what Ubuntu developed back in the day when they started. I think it was with Ubuntu 13.04 or 13.10. They moved away from GNOME 2, they didn't want to move to GNOME 3, and so they built their own thing. Unity sort of died at around the Ubuntu 18.04 mark, but it was resurrected in Ubuntu Unity Edition. And it seemed like the desktop would have some new stuff being added, some stuff being revamped, but it also looks like now this project has completely faltered. It was picked up by just one person, apparently very talented, but also one person can't really maintain an entire desktop. The issue is Unity has not really moved past its old Ubuntu 17.10 roots. It hasn't really evolved. It is not a bad option, but honestly you can replicate what it does really easily in KDE or even with a few GNOME extensions, apart maybe from the global menu, which is still a pain even on KDE to set up properly with all the applications. Apart from that, you can replicate the entire experience and it's probably going to perform better, look better, be more customizable, be more themable. So I don't see any real reason to use Unity right now apart from nostalgia, so it's gonna go at the very bottom tier. In the previous video back in 2023, I added Qtfish, which was a desktop environment that was starting to be picked back up at the time. It seems to have completely died, so I'm not going to talk about this one. And among others that I haven't tried, there's something like Lumina, there's Enlightenment that I haven't given a shot, so I can't really rank them here. If you want me to give them a shot, let me know in the comments, list all the desktops that I haven't tried and that you want me to review, and I'll maybe make a dedicated video about this, and I'll integrate them in the next tier list next year in 2026. Anyway, these were all just my personal rankings for my personal use case. I know some of you will have very different opinions on all of this, so don't hesitate to let me know about those opinions down in the comments. And I leave you on this segue to our sponsor. It's Tuxedo Computers. You all know about them by now. They make desktops and laptops that ship with Linux out of the box. I only use their computers these days. Everything I do on this channel and on my other YouTube channel talking about Warhammer, it's done on one of their laptops running their distro, Tuxedo OS. And all my gaming needs are done with a Tuxedo Cube, one of their relatively small form factor PCs plugged into my TV, running Nobara with the full screen Steam interface. I use it as a console. It has not disappointed. They have a big range of computers. They will suit every price point and every need with plenty of customization options. So do check out the link in the description and check out Tuxedo Computers. They're really, really good and they actively contribute to Linux as well in building these systems. So it's kind of important to support the projects we love. So thanks for watching and or listening to that video. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons are. You know why you should click them to make the channel grow a little bit more. And as always, if you want to support the channel, there are plenty of links in the description to do just that. It's cheap and you get a bunch of nice benefits for it. So thanks for watching and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!